Using using Streamlabs OBS, all my streams are really laggy. A little bit closer to the modem, so hopefully that helps. So take a break from talking about the Occupy Congress protests, and I wanted to go over this story because this is it's really interesting. You can see from the title of the stream, it has a lot to do with Glen Greenwald and Chelsea Manning, and it's really strange to see two people whose I think their goals are essentially the same. Just sort of they're sort of going about it in different ways, and without making any determination. Well, maybe I should. I mean, I think there's a couple of ways of looking at how to get your message out there. So we, we used the protest for example yesterday. It was a small number of people that showed up. The goal is to reach a large audience because the goal ultimately is to get attention for your ideas in order to affect some kind of change. So it seems like Glenn Greenwald and Chelsea Manning have started to clash. And before getting into his Substack article, because in his Substack article he released all the communications they've had to try to get out ahead of her accusations that she feels threatened by him. And as far as I can tell, there's no obvious threats that are made, and I can only imagine that Chelsea Manning has been through a lot. Um, in her exchanges with Glenn, it seems like it shows a little bit that she, I don't know, it's hard to say. It's hard to say whether someone's been sucked in by the wrong crowd, whether it's their ideas, and then, she is advocating for the removal of, I guess, a lot of the people in Fox News. And a lot of the people in Fox News are garbage pail uh, refuse of the world. Um, then it comes down to issues of censorship. Free speech is a right. It has to be a right for everybody, unless you're saying something that there's already laws in the books for threatening someone's life, etc., etc., etc. And we saw yesterday that while, was it January 6th, I think, Capitol riots, Capitol riots happened, and basically just rolled out the red carpet for angry Trump supporters to storm into the Capitol building. And yes, they had a lot more people, and I'm sure the police were scared, but that's a very convenient way to explain it. I think the truth really is that a lot of those Capitol police officers agree with what Donald Trump stands for, and they wanted those people in that building. They wanted to make a statement, but if you lay down a heavy hand on one side, You increase the Capitol Police budget by billions of dollars, and you go on this huge, I don't want to call it a witch hunt. I mean, people that broke the law, I guess. I mean, but they were, be careful what I say here. If they had stayed outside of the Capitol building and peacefully protested, which is what they were doing in the beginning. Well, maybe not that either. Let me put it this way. The amount of resistance we met yesterday, having 25 people in front of the Capitol steps, to get 4 people arrested for using the bullhorn, I think you can say that we should be careful how much we applaud, no matter what, the lessening of free speech, um, the demonizing of protests. And the police already have way too many military resources. They have too many resources in general. A lot of their resources should be allocated to other departments. And if I could try and tie it together, these kinds of freedoms that we expect to enjoy in this country have to be available to people that we don't like. Because if those freedoms are not available to people that we don't like, we go on a witch hunt to chase all of the people we don't like out of the room and silence them. Then when we say something that other people or the established order, the people in power don't like, those tools and those mechanisms that we have applauded will be used against us. So I think Glen Greenwald is coming from a place where, for one, he will get his message out wherever he can, and his message doesn't change. It may evolve, but it doesn't change. He's certainly not afraid of any backlash for saying anything controversial, and he goes on Fox News sometimes. And Chelsea Manning, well, let's look at a little bit of history of who she is. So, Chelsea Manning was a military officer. She leaked diplomatic cables detailing discussions between American diplomats and Icelandic government officials. The leak barely registered with the public, but it was the first of what turned out to be nearly 750,000 sensitive documents sent to WikiLeaks by Chelsea Manning. Manning is now considered one of the most prolific and significant whistleblowers in American history, as her leaks shed light on atrocities committed by American armed forces, painted a far grimmer picture of the wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq and Afghanistan, and greatly embarrassed the United States diplomatic establishment. And that's a huge, huge problem, because when you go out on the Capitol steps and use a bullhorn when you're not supposed to, or wear too many red bandanas, they may put you in a paddy wagon and lock you in a cell and process you and make you suffer for a few hours and then release you with a traffic ticket, essentially, with a summary violation and a fine. If you have access to sensitive documents that prove United States war crimes, You leak that information, you end up in jail. Right now, Julian Assange is being persecuted for now more than a decade, basically in solitary confinement. Well, he is in solitary confinement in Belmarsh prison. They're trying to extradite him to the United States. And they want to quite literally kill the man for publishing proof, not for publishing lies, not for slandering people. He published the truth about U.S. war crimes and exposed how we kill civilians overseas. So Manning was an intelligence analyst in the United States Army, was deployed to Iraq in October of 2009. The job gave her access to all manner of classified documents. And what did she reveal? The diplomatic cables contained frank discussions of policy and American descriptions of world leaders, many of whom found cause to be offended, but other leaks revealed shocking truths about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Manning and WikiLeaks released multiple accounts and even videos of U.S. airstrikes that killed civilians, and the information they disclosed led watchdogs to estimate that American armed forces were responsible for over 10,000 more civilian deaths than they had officially acknowledged. As a whole, the leaks showed that the wars were not only going much worse than the government led the populace to believe, but that the scope of humanitarian disaster was larger as well. She was arrested May of 2010, eventually sentenced to 35 years in prison in a military prison. And then President Barack Obama stopped short of pardoning her, but commuted her sentence in January of 2017, just 3 days before leaving office. I think altogether she served about 7 years in jail. While she was in jail, she transitioned, caused a lot of controversy, and she didn't belong in jail for even one day, in my opinion. So, just for that, she deserves to be called a hero until the day she dies. That's a very brave thing to do. She took great risk. There's a problem with heroes, and there's a problem with celebrities. They can let you down, they can disappoint you. And just because a person does something good, something of great good, it doesn't mean that everything they do from then on is right. Um, Noam Chomsky wrote Manufacturing Consent. It's a book that everyone cites to show how the mass media is basically a propaganda machine to keep people pliable, to make people easier to control, push narratives for the powerful, for the State Department, and to create a mass consensus to shut down dissenting ideas, that it's a system. There's no little guy behind a curtain pulling all the levers. It's way more insidious than that. But brave people who do brave things can have some bad ideas at times. So who is Glen Greenwald? Well, this is a good clip of him that really, well, for me personally, it makes you love the guy.
Now, and deciding what should be released. I can understand why the President of the United States would say, you know, I was elected to this office. How come Glen Greenwald gets to decide what's classified in America?
Yeah, well, unfortunately for that point of view, there's this thing called the Constitution, the First Amendment of which guarantees a free press. And if you go back to the Pentagon Papers, where Daniel Ellsberg, who's widely considered a hero, took it upon himself to give many thousands of pages to the New York Times, and those two parties that weren't elected, Daniel Ellsberg and the New York Times, decided which of those secret documents the American people should learn about, and it was profoundly important to learn that our government was lying about the war. Same thing throughout the Bush years. I didn't hear any liberals saying, how come whistleblowers took it upon themselves to reveal the Bush torture program or the NSA warrantless eavesdropping program or Abu Ghraib abuses, also things that were kept secret. And the reason is that part of our democracy requires that when the government keeps things secret, that the citizenry has a right to know, like the fact that they're building a massive spying apparatus that's aimed directly at us, that it's up to whistleblowers in the government and then a free press to report it. That's as much a part of how our democracy functions as going to the ballot booth, electing leaders, and then putting your blind trust in the fact that they're going to do the right thing.
But
Look at Bill Maher's face when Glenn Greenwald gets that applause from his audience. Um, Bill Maher is the definition of an insufferable twat or insufferable shitlib. He has not probably shopped for groceries in over a decade. He's probably not have to drive himself anywhere for over a decade. He may not even have to pick out his own clothes. He most certainly doesn't have to wash any dishes or pick up after himself in his home. He probably never has to cook himself any meals, or probably even write any of his material for his show. He is a wealthy man who may have once been a halfway decent comedian who is right alongside with someone like Ellen, who sits at a baseball game with George W. Bush and hugs him and shakes the hand of a war criminal who should be ostracized from society, who should actually be in chains in prison for committing terrible, terrible crimes against humanity. Gives me a little bit of warmth inside to see people like that squirm. And you know what? The problem is, too, I mean, it's okay. If he wants to be rich, that's fine. But don't pretend to be a champion for working class people when you wouldn't piss on a worker if he was on fire in front of you. But, anyways,
would you not agree that some things need to be secret?
Sure, and that's the reason that although the count that you said before was the number that Edward Snowden gave us is actually a wildly inflated account that comes from the government, but he did give us a lot of documents. And what he said when he did that was, I don't think all of this should be public. There's a lot in here that I'm giving you for your own edification to understand how the system works as journalists, but I don't want this published. And the vast majority of what he gave us, what he gave the Washington Post, hasn't been published yet. And much of it will never be at his request, precisely because the government does have some things that it keeps legitimately secret. But among those things that the government keeps legitimately secret is not the fact that they're collecting everybody's communication data, regardless of whether you've done anything wrong, or the fact that they're able to invade Facebook and Google and Yahoo without any kind of court supervision. Those are the kinds of things that citizens have a right to know in a healthy democracy.
Yeah, I understand that.
so you have Chelsea Manning, who leaks documents about war crimes and she's punished. You have Edward Snowden, who's now hiding out in Russia, who would certainly be in the same or if not worse conditions than Julian Assange if he had been caught. Julian Assange actually helped him to escape to Russia. while he was running a political campaign at great cost to himself personally, helped another leaker escape the heavy hand of justice that would seek to demonize his brave actions. And then you have Glenn Greenwald, who helped Edward Snowden publish this material. You have Chelsea Manning. And Glenn Greenwald and Chelsea Manning now, for some reason, are set against each other. But before we get into that, let's play the rest of this clip. And I may have to go to another stream to find the clip, because maybe this isn't the one I was looking for. But this is good.
I just think there is something to be said for, well, if it's all open, why don't we get to choose who decides? Now, I think if we were going to decide, you actually would be a pretty good guy to decide, because I respect you and I like you and I think you're very smart. But what if it was Perez Hilton? You know, I mean, okay. Wouldn't be happening without it. Of Ron Paul. I agree now. He also says something completely nuts. He reminds me a lot of Ron Paul. As I nod along, and then he says, I mean,
All right, go ahead.
he said, these programs were never manipulation. Every decision you've ever made.
I'm just going to go to another stream to find the clip. Let's see.
Like, I'm going to put a bet on Amazon.
We don't sell a bed for probably 6 months. And I just kind of forgot about it.
And speaking of shit, never had to have his medicine, never lived under a bridge, never went homeless, never had everything, never had to worry about anything. So listen to what this is amazing, and here we go.
But liberals, as usual.
Let's turn it up a little.
But liberals, as usual in this era, have now gone too far in the other direction. They under-romanticize America. They have no perspective. Last week, the Taliban murdered a comedian. His name was Nizar Muhammad, and he made up funny songs on TikTok.
That's a whole nother situation. Whole nother story. That is off subject. Okay.
Neoliberal hour, because that's what Bill Maher is, a neoliberal. My maid says she's happy. That's Bill Maher. Well, there's more?
But that doesn't make us the bad guys.
Oh, we already saw that. Now, here's 2 minutes of Bill Maher getting his ass handed to him. This is going to be a nice palate cleanser. This is going to make all that shit you just heard feel a lot better. Ready? Watch this.
It's not our fault what came out. We didn't go into Egypt.
Well, we
wound up with the Muslim Brotherhood.
We didn't go into Egypt. We were supporting and propping up Mubarak for 30 years, even as we were cheering for all the Tahrir Square demonstrators as though we were on their side. It was our government that kept Mubarak in power, just like we've done across the entire Muslim world. And it's amazing for you to say that, well, look at all these Muslims. The minute you give them a little bit of freedom, they go wild and they start being all violent. How can you be a citizen of the United States, the country that has generated more violence and militarism in the world over the last 5 or 6 decades, and say, look at those people over there, they are incredibly violent? we play a significant role in what has been happening in the Middle East because we've been interfering and dominating that region in order to have access to the
I
oil and
wasn't
protect
talking about
Israel.
violence.
So,
I was talking about theocracy. That doesn't happen here.
no, well, okay, that doesn't happen.
Bill Maher made a movie, I think, about religion at one point. This pride in being an atheist, and I don't know what the hell that even means in this context. It's very, very strange for him to throw that in there. He's trying to like send him off on a rabbit hole, but Glen's a little bit too. He's a little too smart for it. Yes, thank you, Therapy Daz. Bill Maher is a fucking idiot.
Here, but at the same time, Iran isn't invading lots of other countries and occupying them for a decade, nor are fundamentalist Muslim countries the way the United States is. So these things are interlinked because we are continuously interfering in that part of the world. And so to say
Really, it's all our fault?
it's not all our fault, but when you send your military for 6 straight decades into other countries to bomb them, kill their children and women.
So that's a way. Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's. I mean, I guess you could call him that. He'd probably call himself that. But I appreciate his show, and we get stuff like this, which is great. I mean, just the cultivation of content is worth it in and of itself, no matter what you think about him. But I completely lost my train of thought. Well, what Bill Maher did there is so that's a very easy way to derail a conversation, and these are logical fallacies. So he's using an all or nothing reasoning. So he's saying that, oh, so it's all our fault. Everything you're saying, oh, so it's all our fault to shut down the conversation. But again, Glenn's a little bit too smart for him.
An innocent man,
We weren't
prop up
dramatic.
But you know
dictators.
what,
Yeah, you take responsibility for your actions and say, to the extent that that region
That religion
is
goes back 1,000.
And they're also saying if so, you cannot criticize one portion of U.S. foreign policy. Because if you are criticizing one portion of it, you are therefore saying it is all bad. Um, I'm not listening to what he says about the Middle East. I'm I'm watching a clip of Glenn Greenwald talking about the Middle East. It's really weird. So many people in the chat come in, I think, to pretend to be Middle Eastern because they think for some reason that gives them some kind of agency. It's very strange. I find it hard to believe that there's so many people come to my show that are Middle Eastern viewers. Maybe I have some sort of weird appeal, but salam.
Years before our revolution. So I don't think we can take all the blame.
I don't think we should. I think we should take a lot of it. And there's lots of bodies and corpses that have been piled up in the name of Christianity and Judaism as well.
Not recently.
Have you
That's
heard of the
false.
occupation of the West Bank and Gaza for the last 50 years, motivated in part by extremist views of Judaism, or the wars in Europe, or the fact that there were generals in the United States saying we have to go and invade and destroy Iraq, a country of 26 million people, because our God is bigger? Lots of religions, not just Islam, produce violence.
Well, if I could just make one quick point about Egypt.
That silly liberal view that all religions are alike because it makes you feel good.
No, it makes you feel good to say our side is better. Those
No, it
people
makes
over
you
there are
feel good
primitive
to
and
put a
violent.
crown on your head and say, I'm a good person. How do I prove that?
You get to ignore the responsibility that your own government has for the violence and instability in the world by saying, look, it's that primitive religion over there that's to blame.
All right, it's time for...
So there's Glenn Greenwald. That's his opinion. He is a leftist, and so why is Chelsea Manning fighting with Glenn Greenwald? Aren't they all supposed to be on the same side? But the problem is with the Glenn Greenwald goes on Fox News, and that's a problem now suddenly with Chelsea Manning. Um, Whatever. So since mentioning that Glenn goes on Fox News, let's see what does he go on there and say? What is the content of what he says when he goes on to the It's a repugnant network. It is a repugnant network, 100%. But those same tools and weapons that are used against the right will be used against the left. Censorship ramps up against the right, it will ramp up against the left. The right to vote, to protest is shut down for the right, it will be shut down for the left. And what happens is the society becomes more and more authoritarian, and our freedoms become more and more diminished. So, what type of audience watches Fox News? It's a lot of older people. It's a lot of probably very racist people. It's a lot of people who, after 9/11, were really crazy to go out and get revenge on anyone in the Middle East. They didn't really care. So, in this bloodthirsty quest for revenge, not a targeted hunt for the people truly responsible for that one attack, but an attack on an entire part of the world that we don't understand. Um, like Therapy Daz, I don't know you, and I had other people in the chat saying all kinds of crazy stuff before, and I can only assume that I've poked some kind of beehive, and if you're not one of the bees flying out of that hive from a couple of videos ago that I did, where there was a person here just saying like foul stuff just to kind of get under my skin, and then he claimed to be Arab. So, but we don't understand that part of the world. I don't understand that part of the world at all. And what I say is that neither does the U.S. government, and it's not our place to go in there and try and restructure a country that is what I do understand of it is that it's made up of lots of different tribes. It's very different from the way the United States is. But that's not the topic. And rather than speaking on something I don't know about, and sticking my foot in my mouth, I'll stick to the topic of what happened between Glenn Greenwald and Chelsea Manning. Two people who should be on the same side in exposing the atrocities that the United States government commits with their foreign policy.
Row upon row of sophisticated assault rifles, boxes of pistols, ammunition, vision equipment. Videos posted by the Taliban online in recent days boast of what they say are their seizures of the assault rifles in the Afghan city of Herat. And at Kunduz airport, armored Humvees by the dozen. Some mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles called MRAPs costing $500,000 apiece. Even a small drone. These are the potentially lethal spoils the Taliban are believed to have captured in recent days from defeated Afghan forces, weapons made in America, supplied by the U.S. to their fallen Afghan allies.
So now we're arming the Taliban and marooning our own citizens in Afghanistan. Who could possibly have seen that coming? Glenn Greenwald is one of the few journalists who did see it coming. He writes for Substack, where all of us read him. You should too. He joins us tonight. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. So it's a little weird for the news organizations that repeated uncritically, and not just on the left, I hate to say it, but almost all of them just repeated this kind of happy talk about how Afghanistan was progressing for 20 years, and then they whip around and are shocked that actually it's a mess and always have been. There's some dishonesty there, isn't there?
the whole thing was a fraud. And, you can go back to things like in 2019, the Washington Post publishing what it called the Afghanistan Papers. There's now a book out by the reporter who broke that really important story. They did a good job on it, where they obtained secret documents going up through 2016 under the Obama years, where internally they were saying the exact opposite of what they were saying publicly about the war in Afghanistan, just like they did in Vietnam, as revealed by the Pentagon Papers. They were saying to the public, as you just showed, we're making great progress, we have faith in the Afghan national security.
So the people who revealed the Pentagon Papers are considered national treasures. They're heroes. The people who exposed the war crimes in Vietnam. And you see how the Overton window begins to shift more and more authoritarian. So it doesn't matter which side is being the catalyst for more of a crackdown on free speech or the rights to protest. It doesn't matter which side. The same tools that are used against one side will be used against the other. Now we're putting whistleblowers in jail, whereas during Vietnam, those whistleblowers are still seen by the same society who would demonize Julian Assange as heroes. It's very hypocritical, but things have changed. And just like those leakers were necessary when the Pentagon Papers came out, they are necessary now when Chelsea Manning leaks, when Edward Snowden leaks, and also when the Afghanistan Papers come out. What's up, Sunken? So this is Glen Greenwald. He is on Fox News using leftist ideology and speaking leftist ideas, anti-war ideas. So just like a person can do one great thing in their life, and I was saying earlier, Chelsea Manning, for what she did, and she put her own life on the line, and the time she served in jail, and for what she revealed and the good that it did, she will forever be considered, I would forever consider her a hero. But our heroes have a tendency to disappoint us because no human being is infallible. If you look for perfection in a human being, you'll never find it. Because everyone has cracks. And our heroes will eventually let us down. I'm sure someone can show me something that Glenn Greenwald did that I find to be repugnant. But what I generally see, and Tucker Carlson, 99.9% of what he does I find repugnant and disgusting. But he is one of the few people on this disgusting network that half or more than half of the country is glued to 24/7. Older people that voted in droves and rallied in droves, especially considering with their public sentiment for the war in Iraq, watched propaganda for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on Fox News and swallowed it down. So if one lefty journalist can get on that network, and Tucker Carlson appears to be the only one letting them on, and I am 100% sure he's blowing smoke up their ass, and it is just for some self-serving means, but it doesn't matter because they're getting out a message that those people need to hear. Sun King says, do you think 1984 is a great book? Honestly, I haven't read it. I know of it. I know about it. I never actually read 1984. I probably should. But a lot of the ideas that, they're all over the place. About Big Brother. Is that 1984? Or is that there's another book that's very similar or similar themes. Yeah, Big Brother. Um, I have to put it on my list. um, the idea of Big Brother. I mean, Edward Snowden revealed that, right? So Glenn Greenwald helped publish those leaks from Edward Snowden that showed that the NSA is recording us. They're spying on foreign governments. That there's no laws. There's no more, if there ever were, but they just blew the doors wide off on surveillance of our own people in this country and also people abroad. So back to the theme. So why is Glenn Greenwald and why are Chelsea Manning and Glenn Greenwald fighting? They should be on the same side. Well, this is Glenn Greenwald going on Tucker Carlson, but we should be very careful to listen to the content of what a person is saying and think about what they're trying to accomplish. Every activist wants to reach a wider audience because it's about the ideas getting out there. It's about changing minds with your ideas. And that's really ultimately what it comes down to. If you want a peaceful revolution, that's all you can really hope for.
Security forces internally, they knew the Afghan National Security Forces were a joke. They were filled with illiterate people who couldn't do anything, with drug addicts, or people who had no interest in fighting. They would disappear as soon as they got their paycheck. The whole war for years and years and years was a lie. And so while I do agree, of course, that there are ineptitudes in how we withdrew, the fact that we withdrew, because two presidents, first President Trump and then President Biden, ensured that it happened, is something to celebrate in large part because it's the first time in as long as I can remember as these people, what I do know is the deep state, that manipulate us all the time, that lie to us all the time for their own benefit, have finally lost. And the media is turning against Biden, not because they suddenly became fair, but because they've been in bed with the deep state. That's who fed them Russiagate. That's who fed them all the leaks during the Trump years. And they're angry on behalf of the faction that they genuinely serve.
Well, I hate to say I agree with you. I mean, I think Biden is an awful president, the worst I can remember, and totally out of it, senile. On the other hand, he's the president of the United States. You're not supposed to leak.
So, even I still have trouble listening to Tucker Carlson even speak. And Glenn he does tickle his fancy a little bit. He does. Glenn does throw him a bone, and I think it's part of the game. It's him getting back on there again. You can say what you want about that, whether that's right or that's wrong. Um, Yet then again, just because Trump used the term deep state doesn't mean that there isn't a real deep state. There absolutely is. There are people. There is a military-industrial complex. There are generals that don't go anywhere when presidents change. There is a security state apparatus that doesn't change when presidents change. Some of the leaders might change, but ultimately, this is a huge system that it doesn't matter which president's in charge. Um, Maybe it does. I mean, Biden he did do something good getting us out of Afghanistan. Whether we're really leaving, we did retaliate to an attack on the Kabul airport by drone bombing a few terrorists. We have no idea. No one can actually say for sure if they got the right people, but who they did get as collateral damage was a family of 10 innocent people. A man driving home, I believe he was driving a Honda or something like that. He was driving home to meet his family. His kids were coming out to greet him, and a bomb exploded and killed him and his entire family. There's nothing that justifies that. Nothing, absolutely nothing that justifies that. So, whatever Biden's reasons for getting out of the war, whether it's losing his son, that created in him some sort of soft spot, not to put other American soldiers in harm's way. I doubt very seriously he cares for the Afghan people and the civilians that die. If it's anything, if there's any, really good theory that I've heard, it's the theory that his son being in front of those burn pits and getting cancer in Iraq um, makes him think that he doesn't want to risk the lives of other service members. But now they can just send a drone. And that was another thing that was revealed by these leakers, is that something like 90% of the casualties in drone strikes are civilian casualties, innocent people. So in order to protect our own people in wars that are completely unnecessary, we're using technology to kill targets who may or may not be legitimate, but if 90% of the people that are killed by them are civilians, that is something that also needs to be exposed. So, to get back onto the subject, Glenn Greenwald, Chelsea Manning, they're fighting against each other, and we'll go to a Substack article and just read through it. I will have to get off pretty soon too. So, so this is Glen's Substack, and he says all communications between myself and Chelsea Manning since 2016 to debunk her innuendo. The subheadline is despite my not having said a single word to her since 2018, the whistleblower today claims she's terrified of me, implying serious personal abuse. See for yourself. And I'll just sort of skim through the article. He's long been one of Chelsea Manning's most ardent defenders. That makes sense. He published Edward Snowden's leaks. Of course, he supports what Chelsea Manning did, both publicly and personally. He broke the story about how she was being tortured and held in inhumane conditions by the Obama administration. That led to the resignation of one of Obama's senior aides, so she was being tortured in prison. He broke that story. Of course, that garnered some goodwill between the two of them. There was a transfer to a better facility, military prison in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So her visitors list was restricted. He hadn't had a lot of contact with her. So he led a fundraising campaign for her criminal defense. He raised over $100,000 with matching funds from the Freedom of Press Foundation and Piero of Mars, First Look Media. Loudly advocated for her commutation, long defended her leaks to WikiLeaks. Once Obama commuted her sentence after 7 years in prison, he led another fundraising drive, helping her get funds when she was free to raise in excess of $100,000 for her personal use. He donated $10,000 of his own money to that fund. Once she was out of prison, their only communications were Twitter DMs. So it sounds like, I mean, he did a lot of things to support her. And I want to read through the published direct messaging between the two of them. But what I was saying in the beginning of the stream is that it appears to be the only reason that she's upset with him is because he's going on Tucker Carlson. And that's really all I can see. But that's enough. That's enough. Trump he broke people's brains. He really did. And that is a talking point used a lot on the right wing, and I am on the left. But just like all things are not equal, Trump derangement syndrome is real. There's this extreme reaction in a lot of the leftist circles that is like spinning in the wind, and everything that they're doing is going to restrict us if we try to fight for leftist policies. Every decrease in our freedom of speech, every decrease in our right to protest will ultimately hurt us at the end of the day. And to have two people separated from each other who, in a very specific way, connect. They're both advocates for whistleblowers. They've both done real concrete things to help whistleblowers. Glen Greenwald did real concrete things to help Chelsea Manning. And I feel a lot of sympathy for Chelsea Manning, especially reading through these direct messages. And I think Glen released them in a way to protect himself, because that kind of attack, saying that she's scared of him, is very threatening to a person's to a person's public reputation. And without any context, there's a lot of things that could be insinuated from it. But I feel a lot of sympathy for her. I mean, she was tortured in prison. These people who expose the war crimes, the crimes of the government and the national security state, they are enemy number one, more than a terrorist that bombs the Twin Towers. Osama bin Laden, the Taliban offered to hand him over. If it had been Julian Assange, they probably would have accepted the deal. The Taliban said, stop bombing our country, Afghanistan, and we'll hand over Osama bin Laden. The U.S. government said no, partly because they wanted blood, but also because Osama bin Laden was not enemy number one the way that Julian Assange would have been. Um, so I'm sure they would do anything to get Edward Snowden back, to put them into a prison cell, away from the prying eyes of the press, and literally torture them. There's a lot of ways you can torture a person in a prison cell, and there's a lot of torture that is way worse than what you can do physically to a person's body. Mental and psychological torture, solitary confinement, deprivation from human contact, to feel that every person in your life and everyone you interact with considers you to be a scum of the earth person, less than a person, less than a human being. Every word that you say is a lie or a manipulation automatically. That's the kind of environment that exists in the prison system in the United States, and I am sure in somewhere like Guantanamo Bay, or these maximum security prisons where they would toss a person who embarrassed the United States government. That's another reason why it's a good theory on why we stayed in Afghanistan for so long, is because it was embarrassing for us to leave. The Afghanistan papers came out and they exposed how poorly our efforts had gone over, and now we know for sure that we had done very little to help their country, if anything at all. And we have actually done a lot to make their country worse. They did a poll that I was listening to that was released about how satisfied people are with their lives, their living conditions, and 0% of the people in the poll in Afghanistan responded that they were happy with their living conditions. I have to find that up and put it in another stream. But anyways, so is Glenn Greenwald going on Tucker Carlson worth it for him to fight with someone who should be his advocate? So this is Chelsea Manning, and he says some of the original communications are coming from not from Chelsea Manning, from either her lawyers or advocates for her. So it says, Chelsea's been trying to reach you. If you have a moment, signal me. So she's getting out of prison. She gives him her phone number. She gets on Twitter and she has a tweet, and I asked POTUS for time served, first chance to live out of prison. This is a woman that I am. And they ask, she's launched a time served campaign, and they say retweet if you're able. So what they want, originally from Glenn, when she's getting out of prison, is for him to use his large social media platform and his voice to advocate for her freedom. It seems good so far. So let's see. Led a movement to stop using solitary confinement for any purpose. There's a great cause. There's a great cause to get behind. Solitary confinement is one of the worst forms of torture, and it happens to anybody that goes into jail. I was placed in solitary confinement for 24 hours, locked up in a county jail for doing something stupid. Processing, which is essentially like solitary confinement, but you have a cellmate. And me and my cellmate were bored, and we were also coming off of drugs. And we were very restless, and we were very frustrated with the fact that we didn't have anything to read, we had very little to eat, and we were locked in a little tiny cell with a little toilet in the corner and a bunk bed, just metal shelves sticking out of the wall, no ladder to climb up, concrete floors, and a little tiny window that you have to stick your neck up like this to see out of. So it's not a good place for a person that's going through withdrawal. And we got to the point after 2 or 3 days of this, because you have to get processed before you get into any kind of public section of the jail, like general population, where you can maybe once a week go to the library, or you can get out of your cell for 2 hours out of every three, and you can watch the one little TV on the wall, and fight with everybody over what channel you're watching, or play checkers or cards or whatever you can do. Those things are very precious to you in a confined living environment. But when you're getting processed, you're essentially in solitary confinement, but you have some company, and it's also not so bad. Maybe one of the people that works, another prisoner that delivers your tray of food every day, because they don't even let you out of your cell to eat, will get you a book or something like that. So, but anyways, my cellmate, there's a little fire alarm in the corner of the cell. There's a little metal thing that sticks out of the top corner of the cell, and it's a fire extinguisher, so it shoots water straight out from the wall. And he grabbed a little plastic fork and climbed up on the toilet and said, "Hey, I'm gonna go in. I'm gonna pop the fire extinguisher." It's just something to do. So I said, "Fuck it, why not?" I was desperate. I felt terrible, and he popped it. First of all, it shot water straight out of the wall like a fire hose, and it had all this black soot in it. So we jumped down to the bottom bunk and picked up those little tiny mattresses that they have and kind of put in front of us so we didn't get gunned with the water. And of course, the prison guards are very, very pissed off at us for doing this. So they let the water go until the water in the cell was probably about 4 or 5 feet high. And we were basically getting blasted with a water hose for, I don't know, 40 minutes, something like that, soaking wet. So they put us in solitary confinement. I see people talking in the chat. Stupid shit. Drugs, mostly. Drugs, petty theft. But yeah, not in that lifestyle anymore. Not for a long time. But the whole cell block flooded out, probably about 2 inches of water. There's like 4 feet of water in the cell. They threw us in solitary confinement. We're both in the same cell at first, but his older brother, was permanently housed in solitary confinement because he would literally kill people in the jail. I didn't know this. But because he was permanently housed there, he had a little TV in his cell, he had food. So right away, the guard in the cell, he talked to him for a second, and he got him out and into his brother's cell. So I was in a cell by myself. No mattress, just a metal, empty frame bed. Soaking wet clothes. They didn't give me a change of clothes. So for 24 hours, I sat soaking wet, concrete cell, by myself, soaking wet, for popping the fire extinguisher in the cell block. All that being said, I couldn't imagine being isolated like that in those kinds of conditions, because they can do anything to you that they want to do, and no one will fucking know. And these prison guards are scary. A lot of them are terrifying. A lot of them get off on violence. When there's no accountability, terrible things can happen. That's why we protest. That's why we should expose things that are done in the darkness, that the government does, that prisons do, that anywhere where people have impunity to treat other human beings however they want. Look at like the Stanford prison experiments. I mean, it opens the door for the darkest parts of our psyche to come out. Our lizard brain gets activated. But anyways, completely getting off topic. But Chelsea Manning wants to advocate for ending solitary confinement. Great. I mean, that's amazing. I'm all on board with that. So she's getting out of prison. She says, "Hey, give me your platform, retweet, post my posts, spread my message." So Chelsea Manning is asking Glen Greenwald, initially when she gets out of jail, please publish my posts. Let's see. So let's see. What do you do? Hi, Glen. New tweet from Chelsea. So this is still her. People that are helping her, lawyer, whomever, different people that are working on the campaign for her. This is not her personally on her account. So let's see, courage is not the absence of fear, it's the ability to move forward despite it. That's fine. Little motivational posts. If that's your thing, that's cool. So, all right, she gets out of jail. So she says, "Thank you so much for your support during this critical time." Let's see, is there AP, please publish. Declaring pseudo martial law for immigrants might be important. I don't know what that means, but let's see. Hi, Glenn. Oh, Chelsea saw your tweet. So this is still not her. Chelsea Manning hasn't spoken yet. Pardon, memo's out. So still like staffers or whomever is working for her. And then, okay. Glenn Greenwald speaking to Chelsea Manning. Your interviews and appearances have been so inspiring. I hope you're doing as well as it seems. So thrilled that you're experiencing freedom and the full possibility of your life. XXOO. So this is a journalist who is so plugged into helping leakers. He founded The Intercept. Unfortunately, he had to leave The Intercept because not being able to run it as a single person, he couldn't maintain the standards that he hoped that they would keep. And they started to censor the guy who started the fucking organization, and he had to leave. But that's a principle he is too. I mean, if he was just a greedy person out for his own personal gain, wouldn't he have just gone along with the censorship and stayed? I mean, The Intercept is doing pretty damn good now, right? And there's some shady stuff with their funding, but anyways, um, Glenn is happy that she's out of prison. He led a campaign to raise over $100,000 for her personal use. He donated $10,000 of his own money. He is a leaker or a publisher of leaks as well. He supports her cause. There's real skin in the game for both of these people. So she gets out of jail. And he says, "Hi, Chelsea. I'm hosting Jeremy Scales' podcast show from this week. Any chance we could talk to you on it for about 15 minutes, Glenn?" So right away, first thing she says is, "Glenn, this Tucker Carlson thing is really off the mark." And I think this is several years after she's released. So staffers are talking February 17th, 2017. Glenn responds to her after she gets out, "I'm glad you got out of jail." She doesn't speak to him personally until 2018. So up until this point, there is just the outer trappings of the hero. There's the idea of Chelsea Manning. This is a person who we haven't really heard from yet. We haven't really spoken to. This is what originally was, and then later was exposed, but originally was an anonymous leaker, a military officer. So this is someone that we haven't really seen their personality yet. We've only seen, and I'm trying to hunt for the word, but we've seen the story built up around them. We have heard about the great deed that was done, and we've made our own assumptions to what the person's character would be that would risk going to jail for 35 years to expose something that needed to be exposed, to do society and humanity a great service at great risk to their own person. But and I don't think, I'm not trying to say that Chelsea Manning was a bad person or still is a bad person or changed and became a worse person, but this is the first time, at least in these messages, that we see her speak to Glenn. And the first thing she says is she complains about him going on Tucker Carlson. Do you see the disconnect? What is more important? First of all, responding to a person that's done so much to help you while you've been in jail and couldn't help herself would have been nice. But the first thing that she does, who is she surrounded with? You know, who are the people in her circle? Who is she listening to? And just like you look at somebody like Bill Maher, this wealthy, liberal, shit liberal, these terrible ideas. There's a whole society of people that can have a very disgusting influence on a person to blind them to what an activist is really trying to accomplish, which is getting their ideas out in front of as many people as they possibly can. And instead, to buy into the demonization of their character because some of the outlets that they choose to go on are not conventional or approved. So let's see, Glenn. This Tucker Carlson thing is really, really off the mark. TC, Tucker Carlson, is basically organizing as a Nazbol demagogue. You're losing a lot of friends out here. Whose side are you on? Just the fact that she used the words Nazbol demagogue, because I don't know what the hell that means. But I'm sure people like Vosh or Hassan Piker know exactly what that means, because they're spending a lot of time. They're not going out there, they're not putting their feet out on the ground to do a protest or an action, or volunteering for their legal aid society to help process paperwork to stall evictions, or serve food in a I can't think today. Serve food for the homeless. Or they're not doing anything real to actually help people. They're engaging in an intellectual exercise to sound smart. So, anyways, I'm really extrapolating a lot from just that one little point. I'm probably way off the mark, but what is a Nazbol demagogue? I know what a demagogue is, but probably something to do with the Nazis. So that's another thing that's hauled or hurled at anyone who's too far left for liberals. The first thing they do to shut down the conversation is to call them a Nazi. That's what Vosh tried to paint Jackson Hinkle as in the debate that they had about Syria and the U.S. potentially using a false accusation or a misaimed accusation to justify bombing and regime change in another country. Some Nosball are Auth Center, aka National Bolshevik. You gotta excuse me too, because I have no idea what the hell that means either. I'm sorry. Thank you, Anarcho Taco. Um, but anyways, I get way off the point. I'll learn more about this. I'll pick this stuff up, and maybe I'm just shitting on people who know more than me because I feel exposed because I don't know the terminology, and I feel like it makes me feel a little bit insecure. So. But I mean, it is true that Voss immediately tried to paint Jackson Hinkle as a neo-Nazi or something like that at the beginning of a debate about a chemical attack in another country. But anyways, it's neither here nor there. I'm getting way, way off the topic. So, you're losing a lot of friends here. Whose side are you on? Okay, so how does Glenn respond? He says, if you think that I argued that the effort to pressure his advertisers was wrong, you've either been seriously misled, or you're being dishonest, or you have difficulty reading simple tweets. Now, Glenn Greenwald is kind of a snippy dude. He definitely communicates in that way. Whatever, you can say whatever you want about that. He communicates in that way, so maybe people find that off-putting. Did one of the Russian revolutions. Oswald did one of the Russian revolutions, not nationalists with collective economics. So that's interesting. I mean, so that's like, it may not even be some terrible thing, I'm guessing, is what I'm reading. I definitely would have to do like reading personally on it to like talk about it a little bit more. But so it seems like the people that she's talking to, and I'm sure she was welcomed right into the arms of sort of like establishment Democratic Party liberals. And in those circles, I can only imagine what kind of reactions would be bred into her to be offended by all sorts of things. But so apparently she thinks that he said that the pressure to add to pressure his advertisers. So he said arguing pressure Tucker Carlson's advertisers is wrong. So Glenn is saying, no, I think it's not wrong to pressure Tucker Carlson's advertisers. I'm sure, Glenn, coming from the very, very far left, would be, would be okay with pressuring the advertisers on both Fox and CNN and MSNBC, because they're all the same. They're all big pharmaceutical companies, Boeing, weapons weapons manufacturers, and gigantic telecommunication companies. And there's a whole list of Republican terrible monopolies and industries that cause untold human pain and suffering in the world that all major news networks support. But of course, he's not against pressuring those advertisers. So she's being misled by someone, and that thread comes up a lot through these messages too. That she has some Twitter friends that are beefing with Glenn Greenwald, and man, like Twitter can become a really toxic place, and I totally understand getting sucked into that. Maybe especially after getting out of jail and you get plugged into this little serotonin machine. You probably start taking these little beefs online very, very seriously. But I'm going to read your comment. Tucker is a populist heir to an empire. He won't feel the ramifications of the hateful policies. Yeah. So Tucker has never had to work for a thing in his life. Him and Bill Maher, or I would put them in the same category. They're soft people who have never had to work for anything. Tucker's dad, I think, gave him a ton of money. These are people, and they'll never have to feel the ramifications of all the terrible things that they push. And there's nothing that can justify them. And the only thing I would pause at is just to fight against the right to free speech, even the type of speech that we don't like, because those same tactics will be used against us. And it's happening. It's happening now. I mean, it's a reality um, that the same tactics used against the right are now being used against the left. Progressive YouTubers are being censored left and right. We tried to protest at the Capitol yesterday, and 4 people were arrested for using a bullhorn in a peaceful protest of 25 people. Um, and the police lined the steps and corralled us away just for saying that, we need to do something about the end of this eviction moratorium and the end of the unemployment benefits. There's still people that need help, and the government is perfectly happy to let them fall through the cracks. But getting off topic again, but the reason that happened, the reason that the reaction was so intense and so fast is because of the insurrection at the Capitol. And yeah, the people that broke into the Capitol and killed someone responsible for death and the destruction of property, of course they should be punished, but the establishment is going to try to use this. They'll use our outrage, just like our outrage over 9/11, to promote an endless war, more than 20 years of war, trillions of dollars wasted. Just like they'll take that energy and the desire for justice for people who were killed, which you can argue that can be a good thing, but they will capitalize on that and take it a million miles in whatever direction they want to go. And they're going to capitalize on everybody's fear and outrage against the insurrection that they call, or the protests out of the Capitol. And they're going to use that to beef up the Capitol Police budget. It went up by $2 million or $2 billion. And now, if you use a megaphone in front of the Capitol to argue for people who are going to be evicted, millions of people who are going to be evicted from their homes, you get put in handcuffs, put in a paddy wagon, and taken to the police station immediately. And a phalanx of police officers will come out and surround the Capitol building. So that was used to shut down a left protest. But there's a lot of people on the left that are perfectly happy with being as heavy-handed as possible against the right, insofar as to shut down free speech and to limit the rights to protest for all of us. And once those rights go away, they're so hard to get back. They're very hard won in the first place. But he says, either way, it's extremely disappointing. After studiously ignoring all my messages for almost 2 full years, you finally decide to speak to me in this aggressive tone that relies on an utter distortion of everything I think and said. Finally, I don't want friends whose friendship is dependent on my agreement with them, with their every view. I hope you will. And that's an issue too. And we're all guilty of it. Someone doesn't agree with one little point that we have, and we demonize them and completely ignore them. And it kind of just ruins any real constructive discourse. that we can have. And Glenn, I'm sure he's a controversial figure. And there's a whole industry built on misrepresenting him and generating outrage from the things that he does and says. But I've spent many hours, and I'm sure other people are more educated on him than me. I've spent many hours listening to his interviews, long form interviews on politics and other things. And I can't think of anything that I've found that I've heard him say that I would disagree with, that I would find repugnant, that I would find in any way aligned with the terrible things that Tucker Carlson says. So if he chooses to, having the ability to, which very few people have, to get onto that gigantic platform and reach that many people, and he doesn't compromise his values when he goes on there, and he goes on there with his own hard line, far left approach, then I say go for it. And I guess we can say that it's good that Tucker Carlson is willing to do that, even though he's just trying to reach another niche audience. I don't know. I guess it's more complicated because I'm thinking now of some other things that could be wrong with that. I mean, I don't think anyone who agrees with Glenn Greenwald's leftist politics or anti-war politics is going to then become a Tucker Carlson fan or watch Tucker Carlson's show. Because I guess that could be, someone could say that's a possible repercussion of him going on those shows. I really seriously doubt it. Even listening to Glenn and him interview Glenn, I can barely get through a sentence or two of Tucker Carlson before I feel like I want to vomit. But anyways, it's for the people that are propagandized by Fox News. It's for those people that it's good to have leftists on because they can reach them, hopefully, and light a little tiny spark in their brain, maybe get something going. But again, for an activist, the goal is to get your ideas to as many people as you can possibly reach so that you can have an impact. So, she said, I'm terrified and I'm fighting this on several fronts. Sorry if I'm aggressive, but it's driven by the fact I'm more scared now than when I saw you last. I read what you wrote and it scares me because I don't know whose side you're on anymore. It's fear. This is obviously a person who, like she's saying in these tweets, is traumatized. I am sure there is a complete post-traumatic stress disorder effect from the type of conditions she was in prison. And someone who she may have thought of as a friend, if she has people around her who's saying that, I mean, he has personal contacts with her, they exchange personal phone numbers, and if she thinks he's turning into some right-wing Nazi and associates him with the character of someone like Tucker Carlson, I can see how she would be scared. Especially if she doesn't have anyone good. Like it just sounds like she's or damaged. Maybe that's too harsh, but she's a person that is definitely you can feel a lot of sympathy for and a lot of respect for. But it sounds like in these tweets that she is going through something, and it sounds like, and I would just guess that she's hanging out with people who are hyped up on this outrage that they feed off of it and find it like drink it down like water. And they're passing that on to her and they're scaring the shit out of her about Glenn Greenwald, who is living in Brazil, I think, or something like that, with a bunch of dogs and his husband and, and like going on talk shows. I don't think anybody should be afraid of Glenn. He had to hire bodyguards because he had people trying to kill him for the activist journalism that he was doing. I Why would anyone be afraid of Glenn Greenwald? I have no idea, but I can understand how in a troubled mind you could, and with the wrong influences, you can think that. But how does he respond to her? So he says, okay, let's see, okay. Remember when you went to an alt-right party and took pictures with actual Nazis, and I was so furious that people would imply or even wonder if you yourself were a Nazi. That's exactly how I felt when, after 2 years of ignoring me and my messages, you decided to pop into my messages and imply, based on the thinnest of evidence, that I may be some sort of Nazi sympathizer. So apparently Chelsea Manning went to an alt-right protest and took pictures with Nazis, and she was most likely, and I'm sure from the context that Glenn is giving with his answer, or with his reply, she was not advocating for neo-Nazis. I'm sure she was there to do the exact opposite. But people very often in our society have knee-jerk reactions and a contextless attacks on people's character. They were painting her as a Nazi because she was there and she took pictures with someone who's a neo-Nazi. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe it's not. I'm actually guessing, but still, that is a dangerous thing. Guilty by association. Get out the pitchforks. Get out the stakes. Crucify this person. Hang them up on in time in the square. Um, that kind of mentality is something that is very dangerous. Yeah. The most logical position between two extremes is one that, in capital letters, doesn't advocate genocide. Yeah. Um, so neither Chelsea Manning nor Glenn Greenwald are neo Nazis. Neither one of them are Nazi sympathizers. Neither one of them advocate for neo Nazis. And Glenn, I think, is a little bit more tuned into this thing, and he's a little bit more conscious of the decrease in First Amendment freedoms and the freedom of speech and the freedom for leakers and people, and he's a little bit more cognizant of everything that's going on, and he is calling her out and saying, listen, when they tried to paint you as a Nazi because you went and took pictures with neo-Nazis, I defended you and said, look at the context, this person is not a Nazi. So Glenn going on Tucker Carlson, does that make him a neo-Nazi? Does that make him a right-winger, a crazy right-winger? No, it doesn't. Listen to what he said when he went on the show. So she says, sure, not because of a photo or an association, but because of what you're writing and who you're defending. So we need some context there. But then this is the key, and this is what I kind of took away from the whole thing. So she's saying, I'm actively trying to deplatform these folks. The right capitalized on optics error, but everyone knows my position on the alt-right and TC is that they need to be deplatformed. This isn't a debate or marketplace of ideas. They're using stochastic terrorism tactics. I spent months working on this campaign to topple TC, and it's finally bearing fruit. Also, your blog. Okay, so she's advocating for censorship. Right. Is Bernie Sanders a Nazi? I think he went on Fox News. I don't know if he actually went on Tucker Carlson specifically, but he probably did. And he was running a major presidential campaign, and he was, in a form and in a sense, an activist, and he was trying to get his ideas out to the most people that he could reach. And it's such a simple, premise. And I think everything has nuance. So, you can argue from different sides of this, and maybe in certain situations you're right or you're wrong, but this kind of like quick knee-jerk reaction to paint someone as a Nazi or to call someone the worst, most repugnant thing ever is pretty messed up. I did a video with actually Glenn Greenwald talking about that very thing before this whole Chelsea Manning thing started. So she's actively trying to deplatform people. They think they're doing something good by doing this, but now YouTube is actively trying to deplatform progressive leftist voices. So, what have we learned from all of this? Apparently, we haven't learned very much. Some people have, but very few have. And it's another message that we have to get out there. It's just that just because we're so upset that we see an ugly side of our country and we see this terrible rise of this racist behavior on the right, this anti-immigrant behavior, some of the most repugnant ideas crawled out from the darkness because they were always there. They're always there. They're still there. They're just quiet now. But Trump allowed people to express those ideas. He gave them agency to say and do really terrible things. and he did it all for his own ego. But um, it doesn't mean that we need to increase censorship, because the people who hold on to these tools of censorship, they don't care if you're on the right or on the left. If you challenge the establishment, they want to silence your voices. I got to get through this pretty quickly because I gotta stop the stream. Thank you everybody for watching, and that's really my point. That's really all I have to say. This whole exchange is on the Substack. It's very fascinating. It's interesting that he did this and revealed all of these back and forth direct messages, but I think it completely vindicates Glenn Greenwald, and all it does for Chelsea Manning is just it doesn't demonize her. It just shows her to be a person who is just in need of more, really like positive support. I guess like she needs people in her circle that are really going to help her and not take advantage of her and manipulate her. And that seems like that's what's happening. Is that people are really scaring her and making her afraid of Glenn Greenwald. Those people, they don't have good intentions. They're not good actors. Yeah, that's a good part of it too. Getting away from advertising platforms because advertisers. But there's a little bit more to it than that. But I don't even have time to get into it. Thank you guys for watching another episode of Question Authority, and I'll be back. There's no scheduled time for these streams, but I have a day job, so unfortunately, it's whenever I come on. Hope you guys have a good night, and Occupy Congress is going on. Occupy Congress if you can, if you're close to the DC area. Go out and help those guys out. People's Party, and also local legal aid society that you can volunteer there and help them process paperwork. There's still some tools and mechanisms there. There's a lot of funding for people to get rental assistance, but a lot of them don't know how to access it. There's not enough people to process this paperwork. You don't have to be a lawyer. I'll put that in the chat. Take care, you guys. Have a great